Hey, it's Matt from Hidden Machine here. Growing up, I was always fascinated by games like Blackthorn, Flashback, and Another World. These games were relatively slow-paced, and essentially they would present the player with a series of screens or rooms with specific challenges to tackle. Movement in these games was deliberate and very well animated, but tended to be a lot more stiff than something like Super Mario Bros. These games all fall under the umbrella of cinematic platformers, a genre that was kicked off in 1989 by the original Prince of Persia, but I'd suggest that you can see some of the earliest roots of the genre in 1982's Pitfall. More recent examples would be games like Oddworld, Abe's Odyssey, Limbo, and Inside. I've always wanted to love this genre because I love how the games look, and so many of them are these widely regarded classics that I feel this urge to experience for myself. But I've often struggled to really make much progress in these sorts of games. I find them to be difficult, and over time I've realized that, in large part, the difficulty comes from me not wanting to play the games at the pace that they're intended to be played at. I want to run and jump and shoot as fast as I can, and these games usually force the player to be a lot more methodical with their movement and combat. This is also why I struggle with a lot of Souls-like games, but at least in some of those I can spend a lot of time grinding to get the game moving more at my desired pace. I'm saying all of this to give it a little context to my experience with the subject of today's video, Rendezvous: Shadows of the Past. This is a free prologue chapter to an upcoming game called Rendezvous, being developed by the Indonesian studio Pendopo Multi-Creations. Hidden Machine was given an early access key for Shadows of the Past, which launches on May 26th. Rendezvous is a 2.5D adventure game with a pixel art Neo-Noir aesthetic. The prologue takes less than an hour to get through, and it sets up the story of Sedio, a security guard who lives in a dystopian cyberpunk city. I don't want to spoil the plot because the story is kind of the main thing on display here, but obviously something comes up to break Sedio out of the mundanity of his daily routine, and he's forced to utilize some of his dormant hacking and combat skills. The gameplay is a mix of standard adventure game mechanics mixed with some light stealth and combat elements. You walk around, inspect objects, talk to NPCs, complete puzzles, and fight some robots. I'll talk more about the specifics of the gameplay in a bit, but first I want to get into the visuals and sound. The music for the game is sort of what you'd expect to hear given the neo-noir cyberpunk style of things, but I gotta admit I did find it a bit repetitive at times, as if the songs were very short and they looped way too quickly, rather than being longer compositions that wouldn't feel as immediately repetitive as they loop throughout your gameplay. That can be a really tricky thing to balance, especially in games like this, where there's always some sort of music playing the entire time that the game is running. Still, the music and sound effects are very fitting for the style, and I expect things to only get better in the full version of the game. Shadows of the Past also features some sporadic voice acting, which is kind of a mixed bag. The mixing and audio quality isn't always great in these parts, but I'm not sure if that's an aesthetic choice or not.
In the hereafter, like mom and dad know, I miss them.
The text of the game is available in a variety of languages, but the majority of the voiceover work is in English, and some of the accents here are so thick that some of the lines get garbled.
Gee, and it's still spec?
I don't mind at all when a character has a very strong accent, but I do feel like they could have done a second take on that line, and it really sticks out to me because it's one of the very first things that you experience when starting the game. But again, this is something that I do expect to be improved and expanded upon as the team works towards the full version of the game. In terms of graphics, the game looks great to me. The city really feels alive, with traffic of both the pedestrian and vehicular varieties, some nice lighting, and an overall cohesive look that I think is really clean and simple, but still has a very strong style to it. There's also some very subtle camera movement going on as your character moves closer or further from the foreground, and I think it's a really cool effect. So visually, I like everything about this game except for the character portraits, which I feel really clash with the pixel art that's presented in the rest of the game. The Steam page for Shadows of the Past features a pixel art rendition of the game's protagonist, and I would really hope that the final version of the game utilizes something in that style, because to be honest, to me, these do look like placeholders or concept art. Aside from my minor gripes about the presentation, the game does look really good, and I'm excited to see what other environments the full game will bring. Now, I want to talk about the gameplay a bit more. I mentioned that I often struggle with the pacing of games like this. Shadows of the Past plays a bit like a standard point-and-click adventure game, especially in terms of how you interact with objects, navigate from screen to screen, and solve puzzles. But there's also a more traditional cinematic platformer type combat and stealth thing going on here, which is what I really struggled with. Your character can attack with fists or various weapons, sprint, and perform a dodge roll, all of which will eat into your stamina meter. There's also a sort of stealth movement you can do, which, when it's introduced, allows you to sneak past an NPC that you're avoiding. Later in the game, you're trying to sneak through this building, and there's even all these tall boxes and things that it looks like you can hide behind, but no matter what I did, I was always spotted by these drones. Between the timing of their attacks, their HP, and the rate at which I was able to attack them, I found it impossible to really engage in combat with them without almost entirely draining all my HP. Despite having a sprint, roll, and various attacks, I never felt equipped to do anything more than just spam the attack button and hope that their HP would run out before mine. Initially, I got the impression that I was supposed to sneak past these enemies, but if that is an option, then I just couldn't figure out how to do it correctly. Whether this is an issue in how the game is balanced, or if it's just me being really bad at the game, is hard to tell, but I'm curious to see how other players approach these areas. All in all, this is an early slice of a game that is still in development, so I don't want to judge it too harshly. This prologue episode is free on Steam, and despite my complaints, I do think there's a lot of good ideas here. The story being set up is intriguing enough that I'm really wanting to find out more about these characters and the world that they're living in. There's currently no release date set for the full game, but I'll definitely be keeping an eye out on the project. If you're watching this before May 26th, I can assume your answer is no, but I have to ask anyway, have you played Rendezvous: Shadows of the Past? Do you have a favorite game in the cinematic platformer genre? If you liked this video, please throw us a like and consider subscribing because we put out new videos all week long. And if you like this, you'll probably like the other ones, so get on it, alright? See ya!